What happens when society becomes so confident in its beliefs that it no longer tolerates dissent? What happens when the majority decides not only what laws should govern us, but what ideas may be spoken, debated, or even thought? These questions lie at the heart of John Stuart Mill's 1859 classic On Liberty. More than a century and a half after it was written, Mill's work remains one of the most powerful defenses ever made for freedom of thought, individuality, and open debate. Mill was writing in a period of enormous social change. Democracy was expanding. Public opinion was becoming more powerful. Newspapers, political movements, and social reform campaigns were reshaping society. To many observers, this looked like progress. But Mill saw a danger hidden within that progress. He feared that even democratic societies could become oppressive, not through kings or tyrants, but through the quiet pressure of social conformity. In this lecture, we will explore the central ideas of On Liberty, examine the problem Mill believed he was addressing, and consider why his arguments remain deeply relevant in the modern world. John Stuart Mill was one of the most influential philosophers of the 19th century. Born in 1806 in England, he was educated under an extraordinarily intense intellectual regime designed by his father, the philosopher James Mill. By the age of 8, he was studying Greek and classical philosophy. By his teenage years, he was deeply engaged in economics, politics, and logic. Mill belonged to the tradition of liberal political philosophy that emerged from the Enlightenment. Thinkers such as John Locke and Adam Smith had argued that individual freedom, rather than rigid authority, was the key to human progress. But by the middle of the 19th century, the political environment had changed dramatically. Democratic reforms were spreading across Europe. Industrialization had created large, complex societies. Mass media and public opinion were becoming powerful social forces. Mill recognized that the traditional threat to liberty, tyrannical rulers, was no longer the only danger. A new threat had emerged, the tyranny of the majority. As Mill famously wrote, "The struggle between liberty and authority has been one of the central themes of political history." But modern societies faced a new version of that struggle. Even when governments are elected, the majority can impose its beliefs, its morals, and its expectations on individuals who disagree. On Liberty was Mill's attempt to define the limits of that power. The fundamental question of On Liberty is simple but profound. What is the proper boundary between the authority of society and the freedom of the individual? Every society must impose some limits on behavior. Laws exist to prevent harm. Social norms guide how people interact with one another. But where should the line be drawn? When does legitimate social regulation become oppressive control? Mill argued that societies often overstep this boundary, not only through laws, but through social pressure, through ridicule, moral condemnation, and the force of public opinion. These forces can be even more powerful than formal laws. Laws punish the body. Social pressure, Mill argued, can enslave the mind. Thus, the central task of political philosophy, according to Mill, is to determine when society has the right to interfere in the lives of individuals and when it does not. Mill's most famous idea is known as the harm principle. He states it in remarkably clear terms. The only legitimate reason society can restrict the freedom of an individual is to prevent harm to others. In other words, people should be free to live as they choose, even if their choices are unwise, unconventional, or morally controversial, so long as those choices do not harm other people. Society may persuade, criticize, or debate with individuals, but it should not coerce them for their own supposed good. This principle places individual autonomy at the center of political life. Mill believed that freedom of speech is essential for discovering truth. Even if an opinion appears false, suppressing it is dangerous. Why? First, the suppressed opinion might actually be correct. Second, even if it is wrong, debating it forces society to defend its beliefs with evidence and reasoning. Without this process, accepted truths risk becoming empty dogma. Mill argued that intellectual progress depends on open disagreement. If all humanity held one opinion and only one person disagreed, he famously wrote, humanity would have no more right to silence that individual than the individual would have to silence humanity. Mill believed that individuality is not merely a personal preference, it is a social good. When individuals experiment with different ways of living, society gains new ideas, new practices, and new forms of creativity. Conformity, by contrast, produces stagnation. Societies that demand uniform behavior suppress innovation and intellectual vitality. Mill admired what he called experiments in living. Different lifestyles, beliefs, and personal choices allow societies to discover better ways of organizing life. Mill believed that social pressure can be more oppressive than government authority. Governments can punish people through laws, but social opinion can shape behavior through constant surveillance, criticism, and exclusion. When individuals fear social condemnation, they may suppress their own thoughts, preferences, and identities. Mill warned that modern democratic societies could create a powerful form of conformity, where individuals voluntarily silence themselves to avoid public disapproval. Mill believed that intellectual diversity is essential for healthy societies. Truth rarely emerges fully formed. It develops through debate, criticism, and the collision of competing viewpoints. When societies suppress dissenting voices, they weaken their own intellectual foundations. Ideas become fragile because they are no longer tested. For Mill, disagreement is not a threat to society, it is one of its greatest strengths. Mill's arguments remain strikingly relevant in the 21st century. Today, public opinion spreads faster and farther than ever before. Social media platforms amplify collective reactions instantly. Cultural debates can become global controversies within hours. In such an environment, social pressure can operate with remarkable intensity. People may face public criticism, professional consequences, or social exclusion for expressing unpopular opinions. Mill would likely recognize these dynamics immediately. His warning about the tyranny of the majority was not limited to formal political institutions. It included the subtle but powerful influence of social norms. At the same time, Mill's ideas are often invoked in debates about free speech, academic freedom, journalism, and intellectual diversity. His arguments suggest that societies must tolerate, even protect, unpopular views, because the long-term health of knowledge depends on open debate. Mill's philosophy also speaks to modern questions about lifestyle, identity, and personal autonomy. In pluralistic societies, individuals pursue very different visions of the good life. Mill's principle suggests that these differences should be tolerated so long as they do not harm others. Despite its enduring influence, On Liberty has also faced criticism. Some critics argue that Mill's emphasis on individual freedom underestimates the importance of social cohesion. Societies require shared norms and values to function. Others question whether the harm principle is always easy to apply. Determining what counts as harm can be complex. Many actions may indirectly affect others in ways that are difficult to measure. There are also debates about whether completely unrestricted speech can sometimes undermine democratic institutions or social stability. These criticisms highlight an important tension within liberal societies, balancing individual freedom with collective responsibility. Nevertheless, even many critics acknowledge the lasting significance of Mill's argument. On Liberty remains one of the clearest philosophical defenses of intellectual freedom ever written. John Stuart Mill believed that human progress depends on freedom, not only political freedom, but intellectual and personal freedom. Societies flourish when individuals are free to think differently, speak openly, and experiment with new ways of living. Uniformity may produce stability, but it rarely produces innovation or wisdom. Mill's central warning remains powerful today. The greatest threat to freedom is not always government power. Sometimes it is the quiet pressure of society itself. When communities become too certain of their own beliefs, they may close themselves off from the very discussions that allow knowledge to grow. And so the question Mill leaves us with is as relevant today as it was in 1859. Can a society remain truly free if it stops listening to those who disagree with it?